thought I was out. Every year I thought that I was free. Every year I thought I didn't have to try again. I thought I was free 3 years ago when I'd gone a couple years without it, but then I mentioned it to you people and you pulled me back in. And every year it's the same story. October comes and people start asking if I'm gonna do NaNoWriMo, and every October I say no, I'm not gonna do it this year. But then it gets close to November and people start talking about it, and I start wondering, and this little voice in my head says, maybe you should do it again this year. And every year I get pulled back in. But not this year. I got 50,000 words last year. I won. I'm done. I earned my freedom. I wonder if you could do it 2 years in a row. I hate that little voice. I don't know what it is, but every year, the last couple days before November, I always change my mind and decide to do something stupid. Now, I know you've heard most of this before, but let me give you a brief history of NaNoWriMo and my failures. Now, my first 4 years were dismal failures, most of which barely got off the ground. Every year I tried to write the same story, and every year I started it, and that's about as far as I got. And when I stopped working on NaNoWriMo, I also shelved that story because it seemed like something that just wasn't going to get done. More on that later. And then a few quiet years went by where my Novembers were peaceful and quiet because I wasn't doing NaNoWriMo. And then I mentioned it to you guys. And you said, Chris, we should all try it. And then we did. Melissa, of course, succeeded her first year and showed us all up. I, on the other hand, hit 10,000 words, which was a milestone for me, but still an utter failure. That year, I went with a story idea that I'd sort of thought about before, but it just didn't happen, and looking back, I really think that story is just too research-heavy to do in a month. I just don't think I could do it even now. And then the next year we tried again, and Melissa showed us up again. But I managed to hit 20,000 words. However, that year, I don't know, I hit a certain point in my story where I just started thinking that this would make a really good movie, but a really bad book. Like, I had no interest in reading it, but I would probably watch it. So, I don't know, maybe that's something I'll revisit for Script Frenzy someday. And then there was last year. Last year was the year that I finally hit 50,000 words, and I think it had a lot to do with the story that I chose. It was the perfect storm of something I'd thought about, but I hadn't done a lot of writing about. I had a lot of stuff sort of ready in my mind, but there was also big open gaps that I could use to fill with whatever came to mind. And so after last year, I started thinking that I'd finally defeated my white whale that was NaNoWriMo. I could move on. But as it turns out, last year's NaNoWriMo was not the final boss. It was just a mini-boss. There's still more levels. So that story that I mentioned that I worked on my first 4 years of NaNoWriMo and failed to complete is a story that I still want to finish someday, and it's a story that ever since has been sort of built up in my mind as this insurmountable obstacle. This is a story based on an idea I had in 8th grade that I still want to go back and finish someday, but for the past decade it's been built up in my head as this sort of I can't do it until I'm ready sort of thing, where, you know, once I'd written a couple other stories, maybe I could come back and I'd finally be ready to do this one. But at a certain point, you just need to do it. That's all there is. So once again, I found myself in the last week of October suddenly deciding that I'm going to take on NaNoWriMo. And what's more, this year I'm going to take on the real white whale. I'm going to revisit that story that I started writing more than 10 years ago, and I'm going to actually try to write 50,000 words of it. I don't think that I'll finish it, and I don't even know if I'll make 50,000 words, but I'm finally going to revisit it, and I'm finally going to try to get past it. And now between actually finishing 50,000 words for the first time last year and the fact that I'm taking on this particular story, this is the first time I'm actually, like, scared to take on NaNoWriMo, because this is a really big hurdle for me. Even though last year was the year that I finally succeeded at NaNoWriMo, this year almost feels more significant. You know, maybe the worst thing is that I finally have people ready to accept that I'm not going to do NaNoWriMo right about the time I always decide to do it. So wish me luck in my novel. I'm definitely going to need it to get through November. I wish you luck on yours as well. I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about it. And with that, I'm going to go and try to finish reading War and Peace, because if I don't finish it before the Russian winter, I'm doomed.